Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Stay Real Podcast. It's your boy GD. This is our revival episode, guys, and I'm so excited to be back. I know 4 years is a long, long time, and let's just say there's been a plethora of things that have happened to pretty much put me in this hiatus for the past 4 years. But I promise you guys, I'm back and ready to work and excited to bring you guys such new information. I love doing these podcasts, guys, and honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I had to do all these, you know, 9 to 5 stuff, I would have done this just full time. But enough excuses. I'm just here and glad to be back. So, for those of you that follow me on my social medias, Stay Real GD on my Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or if you guys follow me on TikTok, Stay Real Podcast, you guys know that I've been putting 5 hints for you guys to figure out what this podcast episode was going to be about. I hope the last, hint that we did on Friday really gave it away, but if not, hopefully the title of this gives it away, or I'll just tell you. Make life easier for all of us. So, for those of you that are new here, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And for the people that have stuck around waiting to see when the next episode is, thank you for your patience. I am so happy that you stuck around and thank you for your support. I love the fact that you guys have been a part of Stay Real since the beginning and still stuck and supported your way through and been patient with everything. So, for those of you that are new here, to give you a full little backstory of what I do, I review movies, TV shows, and books. The reason why I do that is just to give some little fun facts. Honestly, more fun facts than reviews, but I do give my input on whether or not it is a good watch or read compared to maybe not so much. Um, so, and also maybe it gets you into watching the movie or the show if you haven't already seen it, or reading the book if you haven't already read it. If you guys have, maybe you end up finding out some stuff that I mentioned in here and you notice some extra stuff. I'm always welcome to finding out new little hints or, hidden messages or anything like that on shows and movies that I have seen about 100 times. Because every time I watch something, especially this particular movie that we'll be reviewing on, is pretty interesting because then you just never know, like, oh wow, that's interesting and that's pretty cool, or these cool little fun facts, I didn't know this. I do the research so that way you guys don't have to. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. To get started, we are reviewing The Lost Boys. Technically, this was a video that I wanted to do 4 years ago. The person I originally did the review with, unfortunately, ended up coming through some hard times. And, he just kind of gave me whatever videos we had, and I decided to scrap it and start anew. Hence why this title is called The Lost Video. So, this is a cult classic, guys. It's one of the best vampire movies, in my opinion. I'm sure there are others, and I can't, discredit any of the other really good or better versions of vampire movies or, vampire-esque movies, but this is still a really great movie, and it is an instant cult classic. This movie came out in 1987, and it still holds up today with not only two straight-to-movie DVDs, which is The Lost Boys, The Thirst, and The Lost Boys, The Tribe. The Tribe being coming out in 2008, and The Thirst coming out in 2010. Now, not a lot of people know about these movies, but it's I've seen them. We'll do a review on those later. But for now, we will kind of make mention of these movies as we go along into this review. And the reason why I say it's such a cult classic, guys, I mean, it started off with an $8.5 million budget, as I mentioned in my hints prior. And of course, As I stated, it made $32.2 million dollars. That's huge back then in 1987. When it was such a huge hit that six comic book issues were made thereafter. The continuation of the Frog Brothers and the Emerson Brothers still going out and being vampire hunters. You can find those books today. Look on your local Amazon or bookstore or Barnes and Nobles. I think you're better off trying to find it on Amazon or eBay. But nonetheless, if you want to know a little bit more backstory and history, you find out some interesting stuff. The continuation of this movie. This movie was directed by Joel Schumacher, and who brought us such great movies such as Phone Booth, number 23, The Phantom of the Opera, and Batman Forever, and of course, Bat Nipples. I mean, Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin. And so with Joel Schumacher, he is directing movies as with those movies, and the only reason why he got the Phantom of the Opera one actually has to do with this movie. Andrew Lloyd Webber, who created the Phantom of the Opera, was so impressed with the music for The Lost Boys that he wanted Joel Schumacher to direct the Phantom of the Opera. So, a little bit of backstory on Joel Schumacher and how great of a director he really is. So let's go ahead and get started into the movie, and I'll tell you a little bit more as we go along. So at the very beginning, we see the Warner Brothers symbol, their logo, and you kind of hear faintly a kid singing "Cry, Little Sister." If you really listen to it, I've seen this movie about a million times. I've never heard this before, so it's interesting to now hear it. Maybe it's some sort of new director's cut. I don't know. I'm gonna have to bring out the old VHS. Wow, that aged me. VHS version of the movie, which is how I watched this to begin with. So it all starts off. We see um, Kiefer Sutherland, or in this movie he's known as David, coming out walking around the Ferris wheel with his little crew. Now, Kiefer Sutherland comes out in show 24, which he's the main protagonist, but he also comes out in movies such as Phone Booth, Young Guns 1 and 2, and the voice of the General in Monsters vs. Aliens. Kiefer Sutherland really didn't want to originally be in this movie, but then he heard that this artist was going to be on the soundtrack, and that was enough for him to say, let's do it. Then we all see the Lost Boys, or the boys essentially. And you have Dwayne, Paul, and Marco. Dwayne, played by Billy Wirth, who came out in movies such as War Parties, Seven Mummies, Betrayed, and more recently, Eternal Codes. Paul, who's played by Brooke McCarter, didn't do much after this movie. I think he did one more movie afterwards, and then he kind of fell out of Hollywood. Unfortunately, he did pass back in the 2015 on this 22nd of December, but it's still nice to know that he still makes a huge impact in such a cult classic. And finally, the last of the boys, Marco, played by none other than Alex Winter, who was the main person in Bill and Ted's Excellent, Bogus, and Face the Music movies. He was also the voice as Nanomech in the Ben 10 live action movies, but never really seen it. I guess I gotta watch it. It gives me an idea of what his voice acting abilities will sound like. So they started with a fight because David kind of flirts with the girl, and the guys there are all pissed. We end up finding out that this rival gang is called the Surf Nazis, which appear later down in the future movies, and I believe also in the comics as the rival gang. And so there is a little bit more behind their backstory. And so the boys end up getting kicked off the Ferris wheel, kicked off the boardwalk, and now we see the security guy get taken. By what? Technically, we don't know, but we should know by now what this whole movie's about. This movie is supposed to be loosely based off Peter Pan. At least that's what the writer um, James Jeremiah's had originally gotten the concept for. Lost Boys, the Lost Boys from Peter Pan, Never Grow Old, pretty self explanatory. The original director of this movie, though, by the name of Richard Donner, brought us great movies such as the Lethal Weapon series and, of course, The Goonies. The original idea was to do a Goonie esque kind of feel for this movie with younger cast. However, naturally, we got an older cast due to Joel Schumacher's decision, with everyone ranging between the years of 15 and 25. So we see Lucy, Michael, and Sam, the Emersons. Lucy has just gotten a divorce and decides to move her boys, Michael and Sam, out to California. But not just California, Santa Carla. Lucy is played by none other than Diane Wiest, who's known for being Peg in Edward Scissorhands, the interim DA Nora Lewin in Law and Order. She was also the voice of Mrs. Copperbottom in Robots, which is pretty cool because I love that movie. A lot of famous actors in that movie, but we're not reviewing that yet. We'll get to that at some point, but keep that in mind. And she most recently played Miriam McLusky in Mayor of Kingstown. Then we have Michael, who's the eldest brother of the Emersons, played by none other than Jason Patric. Now, Jason Patric was in that movie, The Losers. He played a man by the name of Max. He was the main protagonist, Alex Shaw, in Speed 2. And his most recent movies that are going to come out this year in 2024, or have already come out, he is Detective Harris in Murder at Hollow Creek, and Ralph in A Circus Tale and a Love Song. Originally, Jason didn't want Michael to be in this movie, and or at least didn't want him to be what he becomes later down the line, and so he turned down the role. Luckily, Joel Schumacher was able to keep Jason with a promise of creative freedom, because we all know actors love to improv if they can, especially because that's a lot to do with acting, and when you do any sort of acting courses, that's what they want you to be able to do, improvise. And then we have the younger brother, Sam, played by none other than Corey Haim. He later appeared in another Joel Schumacher film, Bat Nipples, Batman and Robin. Why do I keep skipping on that name? Nonetheless, Batman and Robin. He's a biker gang member kind of thing in one of the scenes. He is uncredited for that though. But he also comes out in the sequel to this, Lost Boys, The Tribe. Unfortunately, with his passing in March 10th of 2010, he did not reprise his role in the third installment, The Thirst. All right, so we see Lucy, Michael, and Sam move to Santa Carla, which is technically known as Santa Cruz. Now, one thing that they did keep for the city was it was deemed the murder capital of the world. Back in 1970 to 1973, there was 3 separate serial killers that went on a murder spree, killing about 28 people. Those 3 killers were John Lindley Frazier, Herbert Mullen, and Edmund Kemper. Now, even though a majority of the movie is filmed in Santa Cruz, there are other locations that include the Iron Horse Trailhead Texel Bridge, which is located about 40 miles north of LA. We hear the song People Are Strange, originally done by The Doors, but in this performance, it is performed by none other than Echo and the Bunny. Now, one thing when you come in and you see Grandpa, you notice that he is lying on the floor, and he's played by none other than Bernard Hughes, who is an Emmy and a Tony Award winner. He plays Father Maurice in Sister Act 2, Bob Cratchit in the 1947 A Christmas Carol. Unfortunately passing on July 11, 2006, just 5 days shy of his 91st birthday. What I love about the scene, though, if you look at around, there's all these wood carvings, and I think this has to be my favorite. I did not notice this growing up, and it took a very long time up until I started watching this for this review that I saw the bear drinking out of a bottle. I want one. Don't know why, but I think it just looked cool. I mean, can you imagine if that thing was like right behind me the entire time? You just look at a bear drinking out of a bottle. That's great. Now, one thing is there is mistakes in this movie that you can catch if you're good at catching them. One of them being is when we see the Emersons coming into town. First, we see Michael unloading his bike. Then, after we see him unload his bike, you see him back in the car with his mom and Sam. Then, shortly thereafter, upon arrival, is riding in his motorcycle. So, when does this take place? Who knows? But little little things like that are fun to catch. So now we get to the boardwalk scene, and now there's this huge concert going on. And the original sexy sax band. Honestly, truly believe this is the origin of sexy sax band. Like, it has to be. Anytime anyone mentions, play that sax, this is the guy they're talking about. None other than Tim Campello. The song that he's singing is called I Still Believe. It was originally done by a band called The Calls. Personally, I have heard the two versions, and Tim Campello just hits it a little bit better. But I might be biased because, well, I love this movie. So, personal opinion, others might prefer the original. We see the main love interest, Star, accompanied by her adopted kid, in a sense. They don't really go into explanation of how the two are, but that is Laddie. Star is played by none other than Jamie Gertz. Jamie Gertz comes out in...
I gotta go, Julia, we got cows!
Yes. She comes out in Twister. But she also comes out in... Yes, we already established this, but she also... Stop! She also is in 16 Candles and Jersey Girls. And she was also in a previous movie with Jason Patric called Solar Babies. And it was actually Patrick that insisted Gertz be perfect for the role of Star. Even though Schumacher wanted to make her a wifeish blonde, which I later found out is more of a malnourished orphan kind of ordeal. Like, I saw pictures and kind of freaky. Kind of glad that Jason Patric prevented that. And to be honest, thank you, Jason. We appreciate your efforts. Now, Michael decides to be like the police sting and start chasing after Star, saying, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Because he is eyeing her hard. God, get yourself a life there, man. But teenagers, you give them an inch, they swim all over you. So Michael kind of shoos away Sam, and Sam finds a comic book store. Sam being apparently a huge comic book collector, which is great. And we are introduced to Edgar and Allan Frog, who are so happily named after the horror poet Edgar Allan Poe. And technically, the dynamic duo brothers were supposed to be more of a Rambo, Clint Eastwood-esque character, with Edgar Frog with the bandana trying to be more like Rambo, and Allan Frog trying to sound like Clint Eastwood. Corey Feldman, who plays Edgar Frog, almost lost this role as he arrived on set one day after coming down off the Colombian snow. Joel Schumacher ended up kicking him off the set, and then later on the next day, he apologized to Schumacher, and Schumacher decided to let him stay. And it's a good thing, because Schumacher letting Corey Feldman stay on here began the duo known as the Coreys, who would go on to do multiple movies together in the 90s, such as License to Drive, Blown Away, National Lampoon's Last Resort, and even starting a television series called The Two Coreys. Now, Feldman would continue on with his role as Edgar Frog in The Tribe and The Thirst, and would later also be on screen with his brother Alan Frog, Jameson Newlander, in The Thirst. So we all know that they kind of stick together, and at least we know that where the timeline's at. But for me personally, we all know Corey Feldman as none other than the great Mouth from The Goonies, which rumor has it a second movie's in the works, but don't tell anyone. I don't know, guys. That's the rumor, at least. I kind of am excited to see, but do we really need a second Goonies? Who knows? As I mentioned before, Alan Frog is played by none other than Jameson Newlander, who comes out of movies such as Running with Fear, Bone Tomahawk, and of course, as I mentioned, the sequel of The Lost Boys, The Thirst. Now, the comic book store that Sam walks into was a real comic book store called Atlantis Fantasy World, though it no longer stands due to the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989, which happened 2 years afterwards. Not only did it take down the comic book store, but also the stage of which Tim Capello's band plays at. So, however, you could still find some sort of remnants on the boardwalk of Santa Carla to be able to do a little bit of sightseeing and feel what it was like to be on that boardwalk as the rest of the Lost Boys cast and crew. Now, I had mentioned that Sam was really looking for Batman number 14, which is actually a very serious comic book. Batman number 14 happens to be the one case that the great detective was unable to solve. So it claims. He technically did, but he decided to keep that secret to himself. However, was there only four in existence? Maybe. A little bit more information because I'm not a comic book nerd. And I say that wholeheartedly in the sense of like, it's great as a collector. I'm not a collector of comic books. I have some, but I'm not a big collector of fans. The person you want to go check out is Omni Nation. Shout out to my boy Omni Nation for any sort of comic book related questions. Now, my issue with Sam saying that he's a comic book collector, or at least implying that he's a comic book collector, how he holds this comic is an ick. Straight up an ick. I mean, look at this. No comic book collector in their right mind would ever hold the comic at its bind and let it bend. That's just a recipe for disaster. You just ruin the comic. Nonetheless, here we're introduced to Vampires Everywhere, which was a comic just solely made for this movie. And it was actually on display on the bookstore, Atlantis Fantasy World, before it was unfortunately taken down. But you could still find it and actually get yourself a copy on Amazon and eBay. We're also introduced to the last main character of this movie, Max, played by none other than Edward Herman. Now, Edward comes out as Herman Munster in the 1995 movie Here Comes the Munsters. Edward also did a lot of cameo appearances in TV shows, such as Law & Order as Frederick Mason, Walter in 30 Rock, and honestly, my personal favorite, because even I didn't know this, as Reverend Lovell in How I Met Your Mother. You know, that time frame in that season where Barney and Robin's wedding, he was that Reverend who ended up unfortunately passing due to a heart attack, probably because of that story that they turned around and told. Give any sort of self-respecting priest a good heart attack. Nonetheless, Star gives Michael the slip, and poor Michael has to spend the night alone in his room. Now, what's great here is that you see a lot of posters throughout this movie. The first one we see is Rob Lowe in Sam's room, right there on his closet. Now, you might be wondering, why is there a guy that's damn near shirtless on Sam's closet? Well, one, let him be, his choice. However, Rob Lowe was also in that movie St. Elmo's Fire, which was also directed by Joel Schumacher about 2 years prior to this movie. When we see Star and Michael talking again, they're trying to go out. He's trying to get some food, maybe get some wine and dine action. But then David interrupts. David has said 3 names in this entire movie. Michael's name for obvious reason, Star like a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure Marco has to be some sort of connection there. A little further deep review, Marco has this loyalty to David that is unquestionable and will do whatever David asks. You can see that there is that closeness, almost as if David is the sire of Marco, or maybe they were just turned at the same time. The other one that also has to have a close connection with Marco, whether they turned at the same time or not, has to go with Paul. As you can see throughout the movie, they have this chemistry of brotherly connection, which is great. It could just be the fact that these guys are just close in real life, but either way, this is one thing I love about this movie is the fact that since there was that freedom that was allowed, you could tell that they knew how to interact with another. I mean, Sam and Michael, when they first enter Grandpa's house, just the mere playing around, just kind of like being that nuisance brother, like they understood the assignment nonetheless. So it's great chemistry all around. Now, this bike scene, I love this song, Lost in the Shadows by Lou Gramm. Perfect song for this scene, for this movie actually. If you get the chance to listen to it, I highly recommend. It just goes great, and it's almost as if this song was done specifically for this movie. But, this is 80s and, of course, a lot of hard rock. Let's go. So here we see a giant poster of Jim Morrison. Has a meaning. The Doors frontman Jim Morrison does this song People Are Strange, which we heard earlier in the title sequence of the movie, which was then reprised and redone by Echo and the Bunnymen, which if we see later, we actually see a poster of the band in Michael's room. When he goes in, slams the door, you vaguely see it for a short period of time. Now, apparently there's a Mandela effect here in this scene where David gives Michael rice. Now, I've always seen and heard this line.
How are those maggots? Maggots, Michael. You're eating maggots. How do they taste?
For some odd reason, people believe that he says, "You're eating worms, Michael. How do they taste?" But that was not the case. Yes, you do see the maggots and the worms as such in this scene. Still, it does not make sense on how people got that confused. Like I said, I've seen this movie a lot as a kid. Sorry, just moving things out of the way. I've seen this movie a lot as a kid, and I always heard it as maggots. And then he mentions the worms. But maybe you guys heard it differently. Let me know in the comments. So throughout the movie, we see David with gloves on, and it's actually not without purpose. There's a real reason why he had to wear the gloves. He was technically supposed to be barehanded, much like the rest of the Lost Boys crew, but due to him breaking his wrist while popping a wheelie on his motorcycle, that's what caused him to have a special cast and special gloves made. So, for a good chunk of the movie, you see him with gloves, and then you see him without it. So, if you're wondering why he sometimes has it and sometimes doesn't, that's why. So David brings out this vintage wine that he tells Michael, drink this and be one of us. Now, if that's not the start of some sort of cult, I have no idea. I mean, Michael literally was the first person to decide that he wants to drink the Kool-Aid. Terrible. Star technically does warn her, but, Star technically warns him not to drink it and tells him what it is, but because of the guys mentally messing with him. I mean, that just shows vampires have that ability to mess with people's heads. With showing him worms and maggots and just having that full power of persuasion that a vampire should do, you don't see that in these other vampire movies. Twilight. Sorry about that. I had a cough in my throat. Twilight. That's right. I'm calling you out. So when we see this, obviously Michael drinks it and everyone's happy because now he's part of the gang. And here we see them deciding to test that theory with initiation. This right here is the bridge I had mentioned, which you guys can actually go see. They did build a walkway for pedestrians to go and walk on that bridge and experience what it was like back in 1987 with these guys. You know, they constantly chant his name. We hear Michael's name at least 118 times throughout this movie with the constant chanting and the amount of times of just brother saying his name or Star saying his name. Out of all the names here, Michael's is the most. Then it goes to Sam, then Star. Actually, it goes to Marco, then Lucy, then Star, and then Max. Don't ask me why. It is what it is. Now, Michael's now in this transition phase where he's going from human to vampire and almost attacks his brother. And then we see that he gets attacked by Nanook, which is Sam's dog, because as a good dog, protection. We see him in his reflection, which is see-through, which causes Sam to be afraid and want to tell his mom. That's right. Well, you wait until your mom finds out, buddy. What's mom gonna do? How is she gonna fix this? Who is she gonna start asking? So many questions. But Sam, you're like 12, so we'll let this slide. Michael decides to go try to figure out what's going on, has a lovemaking scene with Star, and then finds out that, yes, he is a vampire. And the way he finds out is probably in the most gruesome way possible. The guys turn around and bring him to a bonfire here. Now, one thing is, the bonfire shows the same guys from earlier in the movie at the beginning. Not only do they try to start a fight with David and the gang, they also stole comic books from the Frog Brothers. The guy with the gray hair ends up dying and getting eaten by the vampires. But here comes a movie mistake. You see here, he's back. Is he a vampire too? Who knows? That's why they rip his head off here. Ugh. Now, what's interesting is we go back to Sam being a comic book collector and his bed is just covered in comic books. Seriously, who does this? What respectful comic book collector does this? Clueless came out a little bit. We're not going there. Review for another time. As we see here, the guy's vampire look, very subtle. I like it. It's the two teeth here, and then of course the actual fang, the canine teeth, and it's very very. It's not too much, but it's enough to make it scary, which is great because you got the red and yellow eyes, the prosthetics for the cheek, giving it a little bit more frown, more grr. It's the best way I could put it, and they really vamp out the right way. And it's not too much. Unfortunately, in the later movies and the sequels, they go just way too extreme. Just keep it simple. I mean, yes, technically speaking, since the movie was in '87, so CGI wasn't as the greatest time frame. I mean, as you see in the mirror scene, there's obviously green screen, and all the flying stuff they actually take off camera so that way you don't see the wires or give the effect of flying. But you got to admit, they do put in the work where it's done. even though, yes, it's cheesy, you have some of these cheesy falls and one liners, such as this.
Holy shit! It's the attack of Eddie Munster! Get out!
Uh, the fight scene between Michael and David, and with just all around funny though. That's why this whole movie has the genre horror comedy and, well, just to give it a little extra flair, teenage angst. Now that Michael's back, knows who he is, and he's trying to figure out what's going on and confronts Star, Sam decides to hire the Frog Brothers to try to go ahead and kill the head vampire. Because apparently, if you are still half human, half vampire, if you don't make your first kill, you have a chance of coming back as a human if you take out the head vampire. Problem is, at this point in time, no one knows who the real vampire is. So, what do the Frogs Brothers do? Once they go down to the lair, the first person they take out is Marco. Now, this actually pisses off Paul and David, because as we see in the movie, the closeness that Marco and Paul have, but also the pure dedication and loyalty Marco has to David. So naturally, when David grabs Sam, he is ready to tear him to shreds. Like, just tear him to shreds. Complete, utter annihilation, because that was his guy. That was the only name he knew. Seriously, only says his name. Forget Paul, who has a few lines, a little less than Marco's, but has a few lines. And honestly, Dwayne deserved a little bit more. There's not a lot of information about Dwayne other than he just looked the part of being, boom, he was the muscle. He had to have been, because he only has 3 lines in this entire movie, but he says it with such precision. Honestly, my favorite line is this one.
You miss, sucker.
Once, pal.
Can't beat that. But nonetheless, when you see David grab Sam's leg, they pull him into the sunlight, and then he gets seared. Now, you think, David's now crying because of the pain. Actually, the tear was due to Kiefer Sutherland's contacts. They were irritating his eyes and gave him that tear-like effect, which they decided to keep for the movie. Honestly, it gives it a little bit of flair, to be honest. So, going back to it, at the end of the movie, everyone's happy, and we find out who the head vampire is. I'm not going to tell you who it is, because that's why you need to watch the movie. For those of you that have seen it, well, now you know. But because of how great this movie is, with just the constant dialogues and the back and forth, and you could just tell everyone just was happy to be there, or just knew it was a comfortable setting. I mean, the Coreys went off to do their own thing, and it's obvious that they did like working together. And you could tell that there was still that connection between Jamie Gertz and Jason, and it really showed that they have a history just by the way that they portrayed the love interest with one another. It just seemed like they already had that connection, which was great. Probably why it came out with the comic books, the 6 issues done by Tim Seeley, which continued on with the vampire hunting days with the Emerson brothers and the Frog Brothers, which apparently Star and Laddie also become vampire hunters as well. We later see that unfortunately things happen in the later movies, and honestly, there was actually supposed to be a sequel to The Lost Boys in between that time frame of 1987 and 2008 with The Lost Girls, which was originally supposed to have Drew Barrymore and Rosanna Arquette as these hot, sexy biker vampire chicks, all because Schumacher thought that it would be a great idea and people would like to see it, but he really said, I would like to see it. It would have been great, but who knows? The world may never know. But with such a cult classic like this, how can we ever top it? And why would we ever want to remake it? However, unfortunately, as of April of this year, there has been talks that it is going to be remade with possible actor Timothy Chalamet playing either Michael or David or whoever in the movie. My guess is they're probably going to make it Michael. But why ruin such a cult classic? I mean, this thing became a hit that to the point where Santa Carla, or Santa Cruz, technically, loved the movie so much and its portrayal of Santa Cruz that every summer they play it at the beach for free. So if you guys live by Santa Cruz or live in Santa Cruz, you probably already know. But if you ever wanted to take a trip during the summer to Santa Cruz, you can go watch The Lost Boys on the big screen there on their beautiful beach. And it just does so well. And the inspiration alone, giving the idea that maybe the Lost Boys from Neverland are actually vampires, which they explore a little bit further into the later movies. All in all, guys, this movie is great. I give a solid 9. Okay, maybe not 9, maybe like an 8.7, but nonetheless, I mean, yeah, there are a couple things that we want. You know, it could have been longer. Definitely want to see more interaction between David and Michael, a little bit more backstory between the three boys, Marco, Paul, and Dwayne. But still, you know, just the vibe alone, it still gives that enough of horrorness to watch on a great Halloween night or just to have fun on a normal day for a good laugh. This movie, all around, has greatness in it, and David's character is such an iconic villain. A lot of people love this movie, and the countless, well, shouldn't say countless, the 2 straight to DVD movies and the 6 comic book issues. It just shows, guys, that this movie does a wonderful job. Such a great cast, chemistry, marketing, writing, everything. So, in conclusion, 8.7 out of 10. I think we can agree. And if you guys find out some other mistakes that you see in this movie, feel free to let me know in the comments. As always, go ahead and follow me, guys, on all my social medias. Stay Real GD, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, which you'll see the links down below. Make sure you follow my TikTok, Stay Real Podcast, also linked down below. And let me know what you guys think. Are there other things that you noticed in this movie that I didn't mention on here? I would love to hear from you guys. As always, stay real, be safe, and above all, be kind.